Welcome to Echo Tales, where every whisper of the past finds its voice, and every real event leaves an indelible mark. We bring you stories, raw and unfiltered, sent to us by our incredible subscribers, reimagined and brought to life through our shared human experiences. We believe that some truths resonate deeply, echoing through the corridors of our lives. We post new tales daily, hoping they offer reflection, entertainment, or perhaps a piece of understanding. Thank you for joining our journey. The words still echo in my mind, etched with a chilling clarity. Intimacy is over between us, she declared that night, her gaze unwavering, her voice devoid of hesitation. The air itself seemed to congeal, heavy with an unspoken finality. No tremor, no stutter, just a cold, unwavering statement of fact. She delivered it like a weather forecast, detached, almost imperious. I didn't explode. I didn't beg. I simply absorbed the blow, a silent witness to the demolition of our shared world. For years, I'd understood intimacy as more than physical touch. It was the intertwining of lives, the sacred bond of trust and mutual respect. To sever it unilaterally was to tear the very fabric of our shared commitment. Most men, in that moment, would start negotiating, asking questions, trying to reason, even blaming themselves. But I've learned something over the years. When someone tells you who they are, or what they truly feel, believe them the first time. I refuse to offer her the spectacle of my collapse, to grovel for what should flow naturally in a partnership. I looked at her a long, heavy second, and in my mind, the preceding months unspooled. The growing chasm between us, her dismissive glances, the phone glowing on the nightstand while she feigned exhaustion, the insidious little comments about how other men did more for their wives. That sentence, intimacy is over between us, wasn't born in that moment. It was the final, brutal harvest of the countless little cracks she'd been carving into our marriage. And for me, it was the confirmation I needed. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply gave a slight nod. Understood, I said, the word barely a whisper, yet resonating with its own quiet thunder. The silence that followed made her shift in her seat, a flicker of bewildered uncertainty crossing her features. That was not the reaction she anticipated. Perhaps she expected a fight, a chance to play the victim. Instead, I offered nothing but silence and a calm acceptance. Inside, I wasn't numb, but I was clear, disappointed, certainly, but not crushed. My worth wasn't contingent on her validation. I worked hard, provided stability, treated her with respect, granted her freedom, supported her choices. I was not perfect. No man is, but I was present and solid. And if that wasn't enough for her, then it was her loss, not mine. A man has two choices in situations like this: debase himself, begging for scraps of affection, or hold the line, respecting himself enough to walk away if needed. I've seen too many men choose the first, only to end up utterly destroyed. I wasn't about to be one of them. As I sat there, a thought I'd once read returned to me. In marriage, intimacy is a foundational pillar, a mutual agreement of shared vulnerability and emotional support. It's not a privilege to be withheld, but a shared responsibility. When one partner unilaterally decides to shut it down, they are not just denying affection. They're breaking the unspoken contract of the union. It's no different from cutting off communication or financial support. It's a fundamental breach. In some places, it's even recognized legally as abandonment of marital duties. I knew where I stood. I rose from the couch, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. She followed me with her eyes, waiting for something, for me to plead, perhaps to apologize for some invisible crime she had conjured to justify her pronouncement. Instead, I took a sip, set the glass down, and calmly said, "I hear you." That was it. No arguments, no begging. The power of that moment wasn't in what I said, but in what I didn't say. Because silence is louder than shouting when it comes from a man who knows his worth. She tried to break it, so that's it? You're not going to say anything. I looked her straight in the eye and answered, "You've said enough." The room went still again. Her disquiet was palpable. My calm, controlled demeanor was not the drama she craved. She wanted a reaction, but instead, she got a mirror. That night, I lay in bed beside her, without reaching, without asking, without trying. I turned to my side, shut my eyes, and let my mind drift towards the reality I already knew was coming. A life where my worth, my joy, my very existence was no longer tethered to her whim or her presence. Because here's the truth. When a woman cuts intimacy off like that, she's already emotionally checked out. And if she's checked out, then I need to be ready to do the same. It wasn't anger that kept me awake that night. It was clarity. The kind of clarity that makes you realize you don't need to cling to someone who no longer values you. The kind of clarity that reminds you of who you are and what you bring to the table. When the sun came up the next morning, I wasn't the same man who had gone to bed. A profound internal shift had occurred, not in her, but within me. Her declaration, as cold and dismissive as it was, had liberated me from the illusion of a shared future. I got dressed, put on my shoes, and started my day as if nothing had happened. But inside, I knew everything had changed. The house felt different, but not in the way most men would imagine. There was no storm of arguments, no slammed doors, no dramatic scene, just silence. And that silence was mine to shape. She lingered around the kitchen, watching me pour coffee and prepare for work, as if waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I wasn't going to plead for attention or ask, "Did you mean what you said?" Because a man who respects himself doesn't need clarification when the message was already crystal clear. Instead, I dressed neatly, tied my shoes, grabbed my keys, and said, "Have a good day." My tone was neutral, calm, but firm. That's when I noticed her eyes follow me, searching for signs of weakness. But I gave her none. On the drive to work, I replayed the previous night in my head, not with regret, not with bitterness, just clarity. She had drawn her line, so I had drawn mine. The only difference was that mine was silent, measured, and, for now, invisible to her. Because a strong man doesn't announce every move. He lets his actions reveal the truth. At work, I was not distracted. In fact, I was sharper than usual. I attacked my projects with renewed vigor, clearing the backlog of postponed tasks, answering emails with decisive clarity, and handling calls with more authority. There's something about betrayal or disrespect that sharpens a man when he chooses to channel it properly. Most men waste that energy chasing the very person who disrespected them. But when you pull that energy back and use it for yourself, you reclaim momentum. During lunch, instead of rushing home or calling her, I ate with a colleague I respected. We talked business, stocks, and the possibility of branching into side projects. Nothing romantic, nothing dramatic, just building. Because if intimacy with her was dead, a new, vital intimacy with my own goals, discipline, and independence had just begun. Meanwhile, I knew she was expecting texts. Maybe something like, "Can we talk?" Or, "Why did you say that?" But her phone stayed silent. And every hour that passed without me bending or begging was another hour where I regained more control over my life. That evening, instead of rushing home, I stopped by the gym. I lifted heavier than usual, pushing myself with a steady, cold focus. Sweat poured, muscles burned, but what resonated most was the fierce control I exerted. When you train your body, you remind yourself that discipline beats emotion. No woman's rejection can erase a man's strength when it's rooted in his own hands. By the time I walked into the house, showered, and made myself dinner, I noticed her watching me. A palpable restlessness hung about her, as if she awaited an explosion that would never erupt. That's the thing. When you refuse to give drama, you force the other person to sit with their own discomfort. I didn't ask her what she wanted for dinner. I didn't make small talk. I cooked my meal, sat down, and ate quietly. She sat across the room, pretending to scroll on her phone, but I could feel her eyes glancing over every few seconds. She was expecting the old version of me, the one who used to reach across the table and ask what was wrong, who used to chase peace in the relationship even when I wasn't the one disturbing it. But that man was gone. Instead, I kept my movements deliberate, my voice steady when I finally spoke. "Tomorrow, don't wait up. I'll be late." That was all. A simple fact. No explanation. No justification. And then I returned to my plate. The next day, I made sure to live exactly as I had promised myself. Detached, focused, and disciplined. I left work and went straight to a networking event. Not a bar, not a date. Something that built me. I shook hands with men who owned businesses, listened to their advice, and introduced myself as someone not tied down by problems at home. One man there, a retired Marine who now ran a contracting company, told me something that stuck. A man's value isn't proven by who he keeps around, but by who he refuses to tolerate. Those words sealed the path I was already walking. When I returned home late that evening, she was sitting at the table waiting, dressed in a way clearly designed to catch my attention. But I didn't acknowledge it, not out of spite, but out of discipline. When respect is broken, beauty means nothing. I dropped my keys, put my jacket away, and calmly said, "Long day." Then I went to shower. Her silence was heavy, and in that silence, I could feel her doubt building. She had expected me to crack, to argue, to plead for her attention. Instead, she was confronted with a version of me that wasn't dependent on her approval. That was the quiet action that changed everything. Not loud threats, not dramatic ultimatums, but consistent, disciplined indifference. Each day after that, I kept the same pattern. Wake up early, work with focus, build my body and my finances, speak less, act more, no emotional outbursts, no chasing, no proving myself to someone who had already declared I wasn't enough. And here's the truth that men need to hear. Women can sense when they've lost power over you. It unnerves them. It makes them second guess their choices. Because when you stop begging, you force them to look in the mirror and ask themselves what they really stand to lose. I never raised my voice. I never lowered my standards. I never explained myself. I simply lived in a way that made it obvious. I wasn't waiting around for scraps of affection. That's how a man should respond. Not with words, but with a shift in behavior. And it doesn't take weeks or months to start. It begins the very next morning after disrespect enters the room. So when she said, "Intimacy is over between us," my answer wasn't in words. It was in how I lived the hours, the days, the weeks that followed. Calm, focused, untouchable. That was my quiet action. Not begging, not chasing, just living like a man who knows his worth. When a woman believes she has complete control over a man, she assumes he won't move unless she approves it. For years, she was used to me being present, predictable, reliable to the point of routine. She thought cutting intimacy would keep me orbiting around her, confused, and waiting like a dog locked outside, hoping to be let back in. But she was wrong. A few days after her declaration, I adjusted my schedule without announcing anything. Instead of rushing home after work, I filled my evenings with things that built me. The gym, networking dinners, meeting old friends I hadn't seen in months. She noticed the difference immediately because suddenly the house felt emptier. Not because I was gone, but because my presence wasn't orbiting her anymore. The first tangible tremor in her composure manifested on a Friday night. I had accepted an invitation from a colleague to grab a bite at a new restaurant in town. Nothing romantic, just food, conversation, and laughter. But the point wasn't who I was with. The point was that I was with someone else, enjoying myself, not sitting at home, waiting for her approval. When I walked in later that night, relaxed and smelling of good food, she was on the couch, pretending to scroll through her phone. Her eyes darted up as soon as I stepped through the door. "You're late," she said, her tone sharp, like she was testing me. I shrugged, dropped my keys, and replied, "Yeah, I was out." No explanation, no defensive tone, just fact. Her eyes narrowed, searching for cracks, but she found none. That's when she realized the balance had shifted. The following week, I was invited to a coworker's birthday gathering, a casual event at a bar. Music, food, a mix of men and women. I went, dressed sharply, but not over the top. When I arrived, I greeted people with ease, ordered a drink, and spent the evening in good company. At some point, a female coworker laughed at one of my stories and touched my arm. It was innocent, but a single candid shot taken that night later ended up on social media, capturing 1,000 unspoken narratives. And as fate would have it, her eyes found it. Of course, they did. By the time I got home, the air was heavy. She was waiting, arms crossed, pretending she didn't care. "Looks like you had fun," she said flatly. I looked at her calmly, hung my jacket, and replied, "Yeah, I did. It was a good night." Silence. A silence thick with jealousy, regret, maybe even fear. That was the shock. Her declaration of the end of intimacy had been a weapon, but seeing me thrive without her was the moment she understood the true meaning of her words. I was not irreplaceable. It meant the world wasn't waiting on her approval for me to breathe, laugh, or live. It meant her words didn't trap me. They freed me. And nothing unsettles a woman more than seeing a man she thought was dependent suddenly acting independent. The days that follow were filled with small but telling moments. She started lingering around me more when I was home, asking little questions she hadn't cared to ask before. Where did you go? Who were you with? What time will you be back? The irony was clear. She was the one seeking closeness now, not me. One evening, as I was getting ready to head out to meet a friend, she finally broke the act. You didn't even tell me you were going anywhere, she snapped, her voice carrying more insecurity than authority. I stopped, turned to her, and answered with calm precision. You told me intimacy was over. You made it unequivocally clear you no longer needed me in that capacity. I am simply living my life. Her face changed instantly. For the first time, I saw regret flicker across it. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then mumbled, I didn't mean it like that. But it was too late. Here's the truth. Once a man truly moves forward, there's no going back. And she was beginning to see it. The biggest shock, though, came not from dinners or photos, but from the way I carry myself in public. One Saturday, I ran into some mutual friends at cafe. I was sharp, smiling, and fully present in the conversation. They asked about her, about us, and I didn't badmouth her, didn't complain. I simply said, we're in different places right now, but I'm doing well. When word got back to her, because word always gets back, she realized her attempt at controlling me had failed publicly too. I was not the bitter, broken man her narrative had painted. I was calm, composed, even respected for how I carried myself. That's a kind of retribution no yelling or threats could ever deliver. The shock wasn't in any single event. It was in the accumulation of proof. Proof that I didn't need her permission to live. Proof that I wasn't chained by her cold declaration. Proof that a man who knows his worth doesn't stop moving just because one person decides to stop appreciating him. She thought cutting intimacy would trap me. Instead, it exposed her because now she was the one restless, watching me slip from her grasp while I stayed steady, calm, and untouchable. That was the shock. That was the turning point she never saw coming. The first time she tried to take her words back, it happened quietly. She was standing in the kitchen making coffee when she said, almost under her breath, about what I said the other night. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't look up from my plate. I let the silence stretch until she grew uncomfortable. Then I said, without raising my voice, you meant enough to say it. And I went back to eating. That was when she realized the ground had shifted. Before, I might have softened, asked what she meant, tried to patch things up, but not anymore. She had made her declaration, and I had made mine, not in words, but in how I lived afterward. Her backtracking grew bolder after that. The more she saw me detached, the more she tried to reel me back in. She started dressing differently around the house, wearing clothes she hadn't bothered with in months. She lingered near me when I was reading or working, trying to start conversations. Sometimes she would place her hand on my arm, as if testing whether the old dynamic was still there. But here's the thing. Once a man disconnects from the begging mindset, those tactics don't work anymore. I saw them not as genuine attempts at connection, but as desperate maneuvers to regain lost control. One evening, I came home later than usual. I had stayed after work to lift at the gym, showered there, and grabbed a quick bite with some friends. By the time I walked through the door, she was pacing the living room. Why didn't you tell me you'd be late? She demanded, though her voice had a nervous edge. I looked at her calmly and replied, because I no longer need to. Her mouth fell open. She was expecting an apology, maybe an excuse. Instead, she got the truth. A truth that stung because it forced her to face reality. The invisible tether she believed held me had finally, irrevocably snapped. Later that night, as I sat reading in bed, she slid under the covers and tried to press close to me. For months, she had been turning her back, pulling away, saying she was tired. Now, she was inching toward me like someone who had just realized the fire she'd snuffed out wasn't coming back on its own. I didn't move. I didn't push her away, but I didn't welcome her either. I stayed still, eyes on my book. That silence was louder than any rejection I could have spoken. She turned on her side, restless, and whispered, "I need you." Those words might have carried weight once, but now they sounded hollow, like a line rehearsed too late. The next day, she tried again, this time with words carefully chosen. She waited until I was getting ready for work and said, "Look, I wasn't serious when I said intimacy was over. I was upset. You know, I need you." I tied my tie, looked at her through the mirror, and replied, "You don't wield words like that and expect the landscape of our lives to remain unaltered." Then I walked out the door. Her desperation grew. She started texting me during the day, something she hadn't done in years. "How's your day? When will you be home? Want me to cook something?" The irony didn't escape me. The same woman who had treated intimacy and closeness like chores was now trying to sell them as luxuries. But here's the truth. Once a man experiences the peace of living without being manipulated, the old tricks lose their power. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tempted. I was simply free. That freedom is what made her panic. One Saturday, I told her I was going out to meet some friends. Her hesitant, "Can I come?" was a concession she wouldn't have made weeks ago. I raised an eyebrow and said, "You didn't want to share anything with me before. What's changed?" She stammered, then mumbled, I don't want you to leave me behind." The words laced with raw, unfamiliar fear. That was the most honest thing she had said in weeks. For the first time, I could see fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of losing me. She had bet on me being weak, dependent, and eager to beg. Instead, she found herself in the position she had once placed me in, waiting, uncertain, insecure. The backtracking reached its peak one night when she broke down crying. I had come home late again, this time from a quiet dinner with an old friend. When I walked in, she was sitting at the table, mascara streaked, a half-empty glass of wine in front of her. As soon as I set my keys down, she said through tears, "Please, I didn't mean it. I don't want to lose you. I need you here. Stay." I stood there, calm, steady, letting her words hang in the air. And then I answered in the same tone I'd used since the night she made her declaration. Need doesn't mean love, and I don't stay where I'm only needed. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't bend. Because here's the reality. When a man has walked through fire, he doesn't go running back into the flames just because the fire cries out. She tried to twist her words, claiming she was joking that night, that she was angry, that I had misunderstood. But I knew the truth. Words like intimacy is over between us don't come from nowhere. They come from a place of contempt, from a decision already made in the heart. And once they're spoken, they can't be erased by tears or empty promises. Her desperation was real, but it was too late. She wanted the comfort of my presence, the stability of my discipline, the reassurance that no matter how cruel she was, I would still stay. But when she saw me living without her approval, she realized that safety net was gone. And that was her punishment. Not my anger, not revenge, but the simple reality of watching me move on without a fight. Goodbyes don't always happen in shouting matches. Sometimes they arrive quietly, carried in the calm voice of a man who has already made peace with himself. That's how mine came. It was a Sunday morning. The house was still, sunlight cutting through the blinds. The kind of morning where couples usually share coffee and easy conversation. But not us. She sat across the table, fidgeting with her cup, eyes red from a night of restless sleep. I knew what she wanted to say before she even opened her mouth. "Can we start over?" she asked, her voice fragile. I set my mug down slowly. "Start over from where?" She blinked, caught off guard. "From before all of this. From before I said those things. I didn't mean it. I raised a hand gently, not to silence her out of disrespect, but to stop the rehearsed excuses. "You didn't mean it? Maybe not the way you think now, but in that moment, those words came from somewhere real. And once they were out, they changed everything." Her eyes watered again. The tears of someone who finally understands that consequences don't reverse just because regret showed up late. She reached across the table, her hand trembling, trying to touch mine. But I didn't move. "Please," she whispered. "I need you here. Don't leave." That was the moment. The very crossroad where weak men fold and strong men walk. My entire being urged me to offer comfort, to yield, for I am not carved from stone. But true strength isn't the absence of feeling. It is the unwavering commitment to one's standards, even in the face of pain. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and with a quiet, devastating finality, I uttered a single word, goodbye. Her face froze, not in anger. Anger is loud, but in disbelief. She had expected me to crack after all her backtracking, after her tears, after her pleas. Instead, I gave her the one word that carried more weight than any argument. Goodbye. I stood, pushed the chair back, and began gathering my things. A few clothes, my laptop, essentials. I didn't yell. I didn't slam doors. Every movement was deliberate, steady, as if I had rehearsed it 1,000 times in my head. Maybe I had. She followed me down the hall, her voice, raw with desperation, trailing me. You can't just walk away like this. We're married. We're supposed to fight for this. I paused at the doorway, looked her in the eye, and said, I did fight. I fought every day to keep respect between us. But when you declared intimacy was over, you ended the fight. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. Her tears turned desperate. She clutched my arm, trying to hold me still. I'll change. I promise. Just don't go. Don't leave me. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Promises mean nothing when they come after the damage is done. You didn't respect what we had when you had it. Now, I respect myself enough to walk away. That's the part most people don't understand. Goodbye isn't about punishing the other person. It's about preserving yourself. Staying would have been the punishment. Living in a house where respect had already died. I carried my bag out to the car. She stood in the doorway, sobbing, a silhouette against the morning light. I didn't look back as I placed the bag in the trunk, opened the driver's side door, and sat behind the wheel. My heart was steady, my hands firm. Before pulling out, I took one last look at the house. It wasn't just walls and furniture. It was years of my life, memories, both good and bad. But it was no longer home. Home is built on trust, intimacy, respect. Once those are gone, all that's left is a building. Her voice, a ragged plea, tore through the morning air, but it no longer held the power to pierce me. I gave her nothing more than a final nod. Not cruel, not mocking, just a silent acknowledgement that this chapter was closed. And then I drove away. The road stretched ahead, empty and open, like a mirror of the freedom I had just chosen. No begging, no regret, no drama, just clarity. Goodbye wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of me reclaiming myself. That's what makes a strong man different. He doesn't cling to what disrespects him. He doesn't bargain with someone who treats him as an option. He doesn't lose himself trying to hold on to someone who already let go. I didn't leave angry. I left free. And that's the real power of goodbye. Some endings are not defeats, but profound acts of self-preservation. This tale, like all echoes, reminds us that our worth is not for negotiation. If this story resonated, or if you have an echo of your own past waiting to be shared, connect with us. Subscribe to Echo Tales for more stories that illuminate the human spirit. Thank you for listening.